My son looked straight at me across the dinner table and said, "Mom, you eat for free here." He didn't laugh. He didn't soften it. He just said it like it was a fact. For a second, nobody moved. Not him, not his wife, not even my granddaughter who was halfway through asking for more juice. I remember holding my fork in the air like my body hadn't caught up yet. Then I smiled. Not a big smile. Just enough to make it look like I heard him and didn't mind. I set my fork down, folded my napkin, and said, "Excuse me," like I needed a moment. No one stopped me. I walked out of the dining room, down the hallway, and closed the bathroom door behind me. I stood there for a few seconds looking at myself in the mirror, trying to decide if I looked like someone who ate for free. Then I took my phone out of my pocket and made a call I should have made weeks earlier. When the man on the other end picked up, he didn't sound surprised. "Linda," he said, "I've been trying to reach you." That was the first moment I realized something had been happening behind my back. And it didn't start at that dinner table. It started a few months earlier, right after my husband died. Robert handled everything in our life. Bills, accounts, investments. If it had numbers attached to it, he took care of it. I never had a reason to question that. We were married for 36 years. He was organized, careful, and honestly better at it than I ever was. So when he passed, it wasn't just grief, it was confusion. I remember sitting at the kitchen table in our house in Naperville, staring at a stack of envelopes I didn't understand. Bank statements, insurance letters, something from a law firm in Chicago. I opened a few, then stopped halfway through because none of it made sense without him. That's when Jason stepped in. "Mom, don't worry about any of that," he told me. "I'll handle it." At the time, it sounded like relief. A week later, he suggested I come stay with him and Megan for a while. "Just until things settled down," he said. "You shouldn't be alone right now." He wasn't wrong. The house felt too quiet. Every room reminded me of something. I agreed faster than I probably should have. Moving into their place felt temporary at first. I brought a suitcase, a few framed photos, and a box of things I couldn't leave behind. Jason cleared out the guest room. Megan bought new sheets. My granddaughter Emily showed me where they kept the snacks like it was a tour. For a couple of weeks, it worked. Dinner together, noise in the house, someone always around. It felt like I was being taken care of. And slowly, without me noticing right away, things started shifting. At first, it was small. Mail stopped showing up for me at the house. I asked Jason about it once, and he said, "Oh, I had everything forwarded here. It's easier if I sort through it." That sounded reasonable. Then there were phone calls I never got. One afternoon, I saw Jason decline a call on his phone, glance at me, and say, "Just spam?" He put the phone face down after that. Megan started organizing things. Papers, folders, documents I didn't even remember owning. She'd sit at the kitchen counter with a laptop, typing, printing, stacking things neatly. Just cleaning everything up, she told me. There's a lot to go through. Every time I asked a question, the answer was always some version of the same thing. "I've got it handled. You don't need to worry about that. It's already taken care of." And I believed them. Not because it made perfect sense, but because it was easier than admitting I didn't know what was going on with my own life. Looking back, there were moments that should have stood out. Like the day I asked about a bank statement I remembered seeing before Robert passed. Jason didn't answer directly. He changed the subject to something about Emily's school. Or the time I mentioned a letter from a law firm, Megan said she thought it was just paperwork and that Jason had already looked at it. I let it go. I told myself this is what it looks like when your kids step in to help. But something about that dinner, the way Jason said it, like it wasn't even up for debate, cut through all of that. "You eat for free here. Not we're helping you. Not don't worry about it. Free." Like I wasn't contributing anything, like I was just there. Standing in that bathroom holding my phone, I realized I didn't actually know what handled meant anymore. So I called the one person who might. "Daniel," I said when he answered. "This is Linda Parker. I think I missed your calls." There was a pause. Then he said, "Yes, you did." I leaned against the sink, gripping the edge with my free hand. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. And that silence told me more than anything else could have. I tightened my grip on the edge of the sink and waited for him to say something that would make this feel normal again. "It depends," Daniel finally said. "When's the last time you reviewed the trust documents?" I blinked. "I haven't." Robert handled that. Another pause, not awkward. "Careful." "Okay," he said. "Then we should meet in person. There are a few things we need to go over." The way he said "need" didn't sit right with me. I ended the call a few minutes later, washed my hands even though they weren't dirty, and looked at myself again in the mirror. Same face, same house, but something had shifted. When I walked back to the table, dinner had already moved on. Emily was talking about a school project. Megan was nodding along. Jason didn't look up. I sat down and picked up my fork again like nothing had happened. No one mentioned what he'd said. That was the part I couldn't shake. Not the comment itself, not even how casually it came out. It was how quickly everyone decided it wasn't worth correcting. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual. Jason had already left for work. Megan was in the kitchen, coffee in one hand, her phone in the other. She looked up when I walked in. Morning, she said, like everything was normal. Morning. I poured myself coffee and leaned against the counter. Do we still get mail here around 10? She hesitated just for a second. Sometimes earlier, she said, why? I was thinking about a letter I might be expecting. She smiled. Oh, if anything comes in for you, I usually set it aside. Usually? I nodded. Good to know. I didn't push it. Not yet. Driving to Daniel's office felt strange. I hadn't handled anything like this on my own in years. GPS on both hands on the wheel, double-checking every turn like I was taking a test. The office was in downtown Chicago. Clean building, quiet lobby. The kind of place Robert used to walk into without thinking twice. I signed in, sat down, and tried not to feel out of place. Daniel came out a few minutes later. Mid-50s calm, the same way I remembered him from years ago when Robert first set everything up. Linda, he said, shaking my hand, I'm glad you called. I should have sooner, I said. He didn't argue with that. His office was simple. No clutter, just a desk, a couple of chairs, and a stack of folders that looked like they'd been there a while. He sat down across from me and opened one of them. Before we get into specifics, he said, I want to make sure we're on the same page about how your husband structured things. I nodded even though I wasn't sure I was. Robert set up a revocable living trust, he said. That means the assets were transferred into the trust during his lifetime, and now the trust continues to operate after his passing. I listened carefully, trying to keep up. You are the primary beneficiary, he continued, which means the trust exists for your benefit. And Jason, I asked. He's the trustee. He manages the assets, but legally he has a fiduciary duty to act in your best interest. I repeated that in my head. Your best interest. Daniel watched me for a second, then turned a page. Over the past few months, he said, there have been several withdrawals from the trust. I felt my shoulders tense. Is that normal, I asked? It can be, he said. Depending on the purpose, administrative costs, maintenance, things like that. And these I asked. He didn't answer right away. He slid a document across the desk instead. A list of transactions, dates, amounts. Some of them were small, a few hundred, a couple thousand. Others weren't. What am I looking at? I asked. These are distributions made under Jason's authority as trustee. For what? That's what we need to determine. I stared at the page longer than I expected to. The numbers didn't mean much on their own. Not yet. But there were too many of them. When did you try to call me? I asked. Daniel leaned back slightly. About 3 weeks ago. Then again last week. I didn't get anything. I assumed as much. That answer landed heavier than it should have. Why were you calling? I asked. He tapped the document lightly. Because some of these transactions raise questions, he said. And you're the person I'm supposed to be able to ask. I let out a slow breath. So you think something's wrong? I think something needs to be reviewed, he said carefully. That's different. I almost smiled at that. Almost. We spent the next hour going through the basics. What the trust covered. How distributions were supposed to work. What documentation should exist for each transaction. I asked more questions than I expected to. Not because I understood everything, but because I was starting to realize how much I didn't know. By the time I left his office, I had copies of a few documents and a list of things he wanted me to check. Don't confront anyone yet, he said as I stood up. Let's gather information first. I nodded. That part I understood. On the drive back, I didn't turn the radio on. I kept thinking about that word again. Handled. Jason had said it so many times. I've got it handled. Don't worry, it's handled. I used to hear that and feel relief. Now it sounded different, like something being taken out of my hands without me noticing. When I pulled into the driveway, Megan's car was already there. I sat in mine for a minute looking at the house. Same house I walked into a few weeks ago thinking I was being taken care of. Same house where I had just been told I lived for free. I grabbed the folder Daniel gave me, stepped out and walked inside. Megan looked up from the kitchen counter. Everything okay? She asked. I set my keys down slowly. Yeah, I said. I just had a few questions answered. She nodded like that was enough. And for the first time since I moved in, I realized I was going to have a lot more. I set the folder Daniel gave me on the kitchen counter and watched Megan glance at it before looking away. She didn't ask what was inside. That told me enough. I stopped by the city today, I said, pouring myself a glass of water. Oh, she said casually. Everything okay? Just catching up on a few things Robert used to handle. She nodded again, but this time it was tighter, controlled. Well, if you need help with anything, Jason's been taking care of all that. There it was again. Taking care of all that. I took a sip of water. I'm starting to look at some of it myself. Megan smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's great. Over the next couple of days, I didn't say much. I watched. That was new for me. Before, I would have asked questions directly, trusted the answers, moved on. Now I paid attention to what happened when I didn't ask. Mail came and went, but it never made it to the table anymore. It went straight into Megan's hands or disappeared into the small office near the living room. One afternoon, I heard the front door open and close. I looked out from the hallway just in time to see Jason slipping a stack of envelopes into his laptop bag. He didn't see me. I didn't say anything. Later that night, I brought it up casually. Did anything come in the mail for me today? Jason didn't look up from his phone. Not that I saw. I leaned against the counter. I thought I saw you bring something in earlier. He shrugged. Probably just work stuff. Megan jumped in quickly. We've been getting a lot of junk lately. You're not missing anything important. Not missing anything important. I nodded slowly. Okay. I didn't push further, but I stopped believing that answer. The next morning, I made another small change. Instead of waiting for things to come to me, I went looking. I checked the mailbox myself before anyone else got to it. Empty. That didn't make sense, not with the amount of mail that used to come in. I stood there for a moment staring inside like something might appear if I waited long enough. Then I closed it and walked back inside. Around noon, Megan was in the office again. Door half open, laptop on, paper spread out. She looked up when I stepped closer. Hey, she said a little too quickly. Need something? I was just wondering if I had anything in there, I said, nodding toward the desk. Oh, she said, turning slightly so her body blocked my view. I've already sorted through everything. There's nothing you need to worry about. I held her gaze for a second. Mind if I take a look anyway? There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. I've got it organized a certain way, she said. It'll just take me a minute to go through it again later. I gave a small smile. Sure. I stepped back, but now I knew. That afternoon, when Megan stepped out to pick up Emily from school, the house went quiet. Jason was still at work. I stood in the hallway for a few seconds looking at the office door. Then I walked in. Not rushed, not nervous, just deliberate. The desk was exactly how she left it. Neat stacks labeled folders, a laptop still open to what looked like a banking screen. I didn't touch the laptop, but the folders, those were different. I started with the top one. Utility bills, insurance, nothing surprising. The second folder had bank statements. Not mine, Jason's. I flipped through a few pages, not really sure what I was looking for yet. Then I noticed something. Dates. I had just seen similar dates earlier that week in Daniel's office. Withdrawals from the trust. I pulled one of the pages closer. Deposits. Large ones. Same amounts. Same timing. I felt something settle in my chest. Not panic. Not even shock. Just clarity. I took out my phone and snapped a couple of pictures. Quick, quiet, no hesitation. Then I put everything back exactly where it was. Same order, same angle. By the time Megan's car pulled into the driveway, I was sitting in the living room like I had been there all afternoon. She walked in, dropped her keys, and glanced toward the office before looking at me. Everything good, she asked. Yeah, I said. Just relaxing. She studied me for a second, then nodded. That night, I didn't bring anything up. Jason talked about work. Megan asked Emily about school. It all sounded normal. But I kept hearing numbers in my head. Dates, transfers, patterns, and one thought that wouldn't go away. This wasn't a misunderstanding. The next morning, I called Daniel again. I think I found something, I said. He didn't sound surprised. Send it over, he said. Let's take a closer look. I hung up and looked around the house. Same walls, same furniture, same people. But it didn't feel the same anymore. Not after seeing how everything fit together. Not after realizing that the things I thought were being handled weren't being handled for me. I kept my voice steady as I attached the photos and hit send. Daniel replied faster than I expected. Can you come in today? That was all he wrote. No explanation, no reassurance. Just a time and an address I already knew. The drive felt shorter this time. Not because it was, because I wasn't guessing anymore. When Daniel walked into the room, he already had the printout in his hand. He didn't sit right away. He closed the door first. That was new. Let's go through this carefully, he said, taking a seat across from me. I nodded. He placed my photos next to the transaction report from the trust. Side by side. Same dates, same amounts, different accounts. He tapped one line with his pen. This withdrawal here, do you see the date? Yes. And this deposit, he pointed to the image I had taken. Same day. I didn't need him to say it out loud. That's not a coincidence, I said. No, he replied, it isn't. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I stared at the papers like if I looked long enough, they'd rearrange themselves into something less obvious. They didn't. So what does that mean? I asked. Daniel leaned back slightly. It means the funds were moved from the trust, he said, and then appeared in an account that isn't part of the trust structure. Jason's account. Yes. I let that sit for a second. Then I asked the question I had been avoiding. Is that illegal? Daniel didn't rush his answer. It depends on how the transactions were documented, he said. A trustee can make distributions under certain conditions. But those distributions must be in your best interest, and they need proper justification. And this, he said, tapping the page again, raises serious questions. I took a slow breath. Did Robert expect something like this? I asked. Daniel looked at me, then reached for another folder. He didn't expect it, he said, but he prepared for the possibility. He slid a document across the desk. I recognized Robert's signature immediately. He was very clear about one thing, Daniel continued. He wanted you protected, not managed, not overridden. I swallowed. That word again. Managed. We spent the next hour going deeper. Not faster, deeper. Daniel walked me through how a trustee is supposed to operate. Every withdrawal should have a reason, a record, a connection to the beneficiary. What about management fees, I asked, remembering the labels on some of the transactions. Those can exist, he said, but they have to be reasonable, and they have to be disclosed. These weren't. No, he said, they weren't. The more we went through, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't one bad decision. It wasn't even a few. It was consistent, structured, quiet. I sat back in my chair and looked at him. How long, I asked. Since shortly after your husband passed, he said. That part landed harder than the rest. Not because it surprised me, because it didn't. Why didn't the bank flag it, I asked. From their perspective, Daniel said the trustee had authority. The transactions weren't large enough individually to trigger automatic review, and they were categorized in a way that looked legitimate. Administrative cost, I said. He nodded. On paper, it can look clean, he said, until you line everything up, which we just did. I rubbed my hands together, trying to keep them still. What are my options? Daniel folded his hands on the desk. We proceed carefully, he said. First, we formally request a full accounting of the trust activity. That forces Jason to provide documentation for every transaction. And if he can't, then we escalate, he said. Potentially to a claim for breach of fiduciary duty. The way he said it was calm. Too calm for what it meant. I don't want to destroy him, I said. Daniel didn't react. I know, he said. But this isn't about punishment. It's about control and protection. For you. I nodded slowly. That made sense. At least more sense than anything else had lately. Before we do anything, he added, I want you to keep observing. Don't confront him yet. I wasn't planning to. Good, he said. Let him think everything is still the same. I almost smiled at that. It wasn't the kind of advice I ever thought I'd need. But here we were. When I left the office, I didn't feel confused anymore. I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt focused. Not angry. Not emotional. Just clear. That evening, Jason got home later than usual. He dropped his keys on the counter and loosened his tie. Long day, he said, not really to anyone. Megan gave him a look I couldn't quite read. He glanced at me briefly. Everything good today? I met his eyes. Yeah, I said. I got a few things sorted out. He nodded like that was expected. Good, he said. I told you I had it handled. I held his gaze for just a second longer than usual. Then I said, I know. And this time I meant something very different. I started paying attention to things I used to ignore. Not just the big things like bank statements or missing mail, but the small ones. The way Jason checked his phone the second he walked in. The way Megan lowered her voice when she took calls in the other room. The way conversations stopped when I entered the kitchen. None of it was loud. That was the point. The next morning, I called the bank myself. Not the number Jason had saved in his phone. The one printed on an old statement I found in my suitcase, the few things I had brought from my own house. After a few automated menus and a wait that felt longer than it was, I got a real person. Thank you for calling. How can I help you today? My name is Linda Parker, I said. I need to verify the contact information on my account. There was a pause as she pulled it up. Can you confirm the address we have on file? I asked. She read it back. It was Miss Me. It's from the message was at this phone. It was Jason's. I closed my eyes for a second. And the email I asked, she read that too. Also not mine. Can that be changed without me? I asked. If the account is managed under a trust, she said carefully, the trustee may have administrative access to update certain contact details. Jason. Of course. Thank you, I said. That's all I needed. I hung up and sat there for a moment holding the phone in my hand. It wasn't just the money. It was control. He had changed where information went. Who saw it first? Who decided what I needed to know? That afternoon, I went back to Daniel's office. I didn't wait for him to call this time. I spoke to the bank. I said as soon as I sat down, my contact information's been changed. He nodded like it confirmed something he already suspected. That aligns with what we're seeing, he said. So he's been intercepting everything I said. Effectively, yes. Daniel pulled up a timeline on his screen. Let's map this out, he said. Date of your husband's passing, initial trust activity, contact changes, withdrawals. He pointed at each section as he spoke. It wasn't random, it was structured. Within weeks of Robert's death, changes were made. Within weeks after that, money started moving. Not all at once, in pieces, just enough to stay under the radar. Why not take more, I asked. Daniel gave a small, almost humorless smile. Because taking less looks safer, he said. Large, sudden movements trigger reviews. Smaller, consistent ones don't, at least not immediately. So this wasn't panic. This was planning. I want to show you something else, he said, reaching for another folder. Inside were copies of communications, emails, internal notes, things I wasn't originally included in. One of them caught my attention right away. A draft document. Not finalized, not signed, but written. What is that, I asked. Power of attorney draft, Daniel said. I felt my chest tighten. Over me? Yes. I stared at it. It was dated 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I was sitting in their living room, watching TV with Emily, thinking everything was fine. They were preparing this, I said quietly. Preparing, Daniel repeated. Not executed, but yes. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't just about using money anymore. This was about replacing me. Step by step. First the mail, then the accounts, then the narrative, and eventually, authority. Do you know why I asked? Daniel hesitated. I have a theory, he said. But I'd like you to hear it from someone who knows your husband's business history more closely. He reached for his phone and made a quick call. Mark, it's Daniel. Are you available this afternoon? A pause. Good. I have Linda Parker here. I think it would help if you walked her through a few things. An hour later, I was sitting across from a man I hadn't seen in years. Mark Ellison, Robert's former CFO. He looked older, like all of us do eventually, but his tone was the same, direct, no extra words. Linda, he said, shaking my hand. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. So am I replied. He sat down and didn't waste time. Your husband was cautious, he said, not paranoid, just experienced. With what, I asked? With people assuming access meant ownership, he said. Mark explained how Robert had structured things not just for efficiency, but for protection. He didn't want anyone, even family, treating the trust like a shared account, Mark said. And he thought Jason would, I asked. Mark paused. I think he knew Jason was under pressure, he said. The business hasn't been stable for a while. That was new. Jason never mentioned that, I said. He wouldn't, Mark replied. Not unless he had to. Suddenly pieces started connecting. The late nights. The tension in his voice when he talked about work. The way Megan always redirected those conversations. So this is about money, I said. It usually is, Mark said. But not always in the way people admit. When the meeting ended, I didn't feel shocked anymore. I felt informed. And that was different. That night, Jason came home earlier than usual. He walked into the kitchen, set his phone down, and looked at me like he was trying to read something. You've been busy, he said. Just taking care of a few things, I replied. He nodded slowly. Good, he said. That's important. I watched him for a moment. Then I said, yeah, it is. And this time he didn't look away first. I set the folder down on the kitchen counter just as Jason walked in with a stack of papers in his hand. Hey, he said like it was any other evening. I actually needed to go over something with you. Of course he did. I stayed where I was, didn't move closer, didn't step away. What is it, I asked. He flipped through the pages, then slid them toward me. Just some paperwork, he said. It'll make things easier. Streamline everything. Streamline? That was a new word. I picked up the stack slowly and started reading. Not skimming, not pretending. Actually reading. That alone seemed to catch him off guard. Megan stood a few feet behind him, arms crossed, watching both of us. I turned the first page. Legal language. Structured, formal, careful. Second page. More of the same. By the time I reached the last page, I already knew what I was going to see. Transfer authorization. A specific amount. A signature line. My name printed neatly underneath. How much is this, I asked, even though I could see the number. Jason didn't hesitate. It's temporary, he said. We just need to move things around for a bit. For what, I asked. Liquidity, he said quickly. Business stuff. It's complicated. I looked up at him. Then explain it simply. That made him pause. Megan stepped in. It's just a short-term shift. Nothing changes long-term. Nothing changes, except everything already had. I set the papers back down on the counter. I met with Daniel Brooks, I said. The silence that followed wasn't subtle. Jason froze. Megan didn't move. For the first time since I'd moved in, neither of them had an immediate answer. What Jason said, like he needed to buy a second? I met with Daniel, I repeated. We went over the trust. His jaw tightened. You didn't need to do that, he said. I did, I replied. He picked up the papers again, flipping through them like he was looking for something that wasn't there. You don't understand the full situation, he said. That's exactly why I went, I said. Megan shifted her weight. Linda, we've been handling everything for you. I didn't ask you to, I said, cutting in, still calm. That was the first time I interrupted her. She noticed. Jason ran a hand through his hair. This isn't what you think, he said. Then tell me what it is, I replied. He looked at Megan. She didn't say anything this time. It's just money moving between accounts, he said finally. We've done it before. I asked. He exhaled. For the business. I nodded slowly. And the trust is part of your business now. That's not what I said. That's what it looks like. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. I'm trying to keep everything stable, he said. For all of us. There it was. Not denial. Not exactly. Something else. For all of us, I repeated. Yes, he said. This house, your situation, Emily, everything. I held his gaze. My situation, I asked. He didn't answer that directly. You're living here, he said instead. We're covering a lot right now. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. You mean I eat for free, I said. Megan looked down. Jason didn't. I didn't mean it like that, he said. You said it like that. The room went quiet again. But this time it felt different. Less like tension, more like something settling into place. I picked up the papers one more time and tapped the signature line lightly. I'm not signing this, I said. Jason's expression changed. Not shock, not anger, something sharper. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. No, I replied, I'm making it clear. Megan stepped forward. Linda, if you just let us explain. I've heard enough explanations, I said. Now I want documentation. That word hit differently. Jason noticed. What documentation, he asked? For every transfer, I said. Every withdrawal, every decision made as trustee. His eyes narrowed slightly. You've been talking to him, he said. Yes. He looked at Megan again. This time she nodded just once. A silent conversation. Look, Jason said, trying a different tone. Things are tight right now, that's all. Once everything settles, it goes back to normal. What does normal look like? I asked. He didn't answer. Because from where I'm standing, I continued, normal looks like me not knowing where my money is. That's not fair, he said quickly. No, I replied, it's accurate. For a second, I thought he might raise his voice. He didn't. He stepped back instead. That's not how this was supposed to go, he said under his breath. I heard it anyway. I set the papers down for the last time. Then maybe it shouldn't have gone this way at all, I said. Megan moved towards the counter, gathering the documents like she needed to control something physical. We'll talk about this later, she said. I didn't respond, because I already knew something they didn't. This wasn't a conversation they could manage anymore. And for the first time since I walked into that house, neither of them looked like they had it handled. I let the silence sit in the room a little longer than either of them expected. Then I picked up my phone and placed it on the counter between us. I've already requested a full accounting, I said. Jason frowned. What does that mean? It means, I replied, you'll need to document every transaction you've made as trustee. Where the money went, why, and how it benefits me. Megan stopped stacking the papers. That's not necessary, she said quickly. We can go over everything right here. No, I said, we won't. Jason let out a short breath, like he was trying to stay patient. You're blowing this out of proportion, he said. I didn't react to that. Instead, I opened my phone and pulled up one of the photos I had taken. Then I turned the screen toward him. Same date, I said. Same amount. Trust withdrawal and deposit into your account. He stared at it. Didn't deny it. Didn't explain it. Just stared. That doesn't tell the full story, he said finally. Then tell it, I replied. He hesitated. For the first time since this started, he didn't have something ready. Megan stepped in again, her voice tighter now. We've been trying to manage a situation you don't understand, she said. Jason's business. Jason cut her off. Megan, too late. I looked at him. What about your business? I asked. He rubbed his face with one hand like he was deciding how much to say. It's temporary, he said. We hit a rough patch. That's not what I asked. He dropped his hand. There's a lawsuit, he said. The room went still again. What kind of lawsuit? I asked. A contract dispute, he said. A client's claiming damages. It's not resolved yet. How much? He didn't answer right away. Jason, enough, he said. Enough to cause problems. I nodded once. So you used the trust, I said. I moved funds, he corrected. For yourself. For the business, he said quickly. To keep things running. To buy time. At my expense. He didn't respond to that. I was going to put it back, he said after a second, before it became an issue. It already is an issue. That's not what I mean. I know exactly what you mean, I said. Megan stepped forward again, more controlled now. We weren't trying to hurt you, she said. We were trying to protect the house, the family. Emily, by not telling me, I asked. Because you were dealing with enough already, she said. I let that sit there. Grief doesn't make me incapable, I said. No one said it did, Jason replied. You didn't have to say it. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed now. You don't understand how fast things were falling apart, he said. I had to make decisions. Then you should have made them with me, I said. There wasn't time for that. There was time to draft a power of attorney. That landed. Hard. Jason's head snapped up. What? I held his gaze. You didn't think I'd see that. Megan looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke. So let's stop pretending this was temporary, I said, or accidental. No one argued with that. A few days later, we were all sitting in Daniel's office. Different setting, same people. But the tone had changed. Jason had his own attorney now. Megan sat beside him, quieter than before. Daniel placed a stack of documents on the table. Let's begin with the accounting, he said. For the next hour, everything came out. Every transfer, every labeled management fee, every movement between accounts. Dates lined up, amounts matched, patterns repeated. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. Jason's attorney spoke carefully. These were discretionary decisions made under financial pressure, he said. Not intended as permanent misappropriation. Daniel didn't argue. He just slid another document forward. Intent doesn't override fiduciary responsibility, he said. Jason finally spoke up. I wasn't trying to take anything from her, he said. I was trying to fix something. At her risk, Daniel replied. Jason didn't have a response to that. We went back and forth like that for a while. Not emotional, precise, controlled. The kind of conversation where every word matters more than how it sounds. Eventually, Daniel turned to me. Linda, he said, we can pursue this formally. File a claim, force restitution through the court. I nodded. Then I looked at Jason. Really looked at him. Not as a trustee. Not as someone sitting across a table with a lawyer. As my son. He looked tired. Not defensive. Not confident. Just worn down. What happens if I don't? I asked. Daniel understood the question. We negotiate terms, he said. Repayment structure. Oversight. Changes to trustee authority. I turned back to Jason. You don't control this anymore, I said. He nodded slowly. I know. Then here's what happens, I said. I kept my voice even. No anger. No hesitation. You provide full transparency on every account tied to the trust. You agree to a co-trustee, someone independent. And you repay every dollar that wasn't used for my benefit. Jason didn't argue. His attorney glanced at him, then back at me. That's reasonable, he said. Megan finally spoke. And if we agree, I looked at her, then we keep this out of court. The room went quiet again. Not tense this time. Final. Jason leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. Okay, he said. One word. No argument. No conditions. Just acceptance. Daniel nodded once, already making notes. Then we'll draft the updated structure, he said. I sat there listening to the next steps, the legal language, the timelines. All of it mattered, but none of it felt as important as something much simpler. For the first time since this started, I wasn't being managed, and no one in that room acted like I was. I signed the final set of documents without rushing, not because I was unsure, because this time I understood exactly what I was signing. Daniel walked me through each page, not quickly, not like something to get out of the way, line by line, plain language, no assumptions. Co-trustee assigned, independent oversight, full accounting completed, repayment structure in place. Nothing vague, nothing hidden. Jason sat across from me, quieter than I had ever seen him. Not defensive, not argumentative, just present. A week later, the house felt different. Not tense, not hostile, just careful. Jason didn't say, I've got it handled anymore. Megan didn't touch my mail. In fact, my mail now sat exactly where it used to on the kitchen counter, untouched, waiting for me. It was a small thing, but I noticed it every time. Emily didn't notice any of it. She still asked me to help with homework, still wanted snacks before dinner, still treated me like I had always been there. That part didn't change, and I made sure it didn't. Jason tried in his own way. One evening, he stood in the kitchen while I was making tea. I spoke to the accountant today, he said. I nodded. Okay, they're setting up the repayment schedule. I figured they would. He hesitated. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't hear him, because I was deciding what that word meant now. For what I asked, he looked at me, then away. For how I handled things, I almost smiled at that. Handled. Still using the same word. Just differently. I believe you, I said. He nodded like that was more than he expected. But I didn't say anything else. Not because I was holding back, because there wasn't anything else to say. A few days later, I started looking at places. Not far. Close enough to stay connected. Far enough to have a door that was mine. Jason noticed the listings on my tablet one afternoon. You're thinking about moving, he asked. Yes. He nodded slowly. Because of everything, I shook my head. Because of me, I said. He didn't argue with that. The townhouse in Oak Brook wasn't big. 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, a living room that actually got sunlight in the afternoon. Nothing impressive, but it was mine. When I walked through it for the first time, I didn't think about who would approve it or whether it made sense for anyone else. I thought about where I'd put my chair, where I'd have my coffee, where my mail would go. Closing took a few weeks. Paperwork, inspections, details that would have overwhelmed me before. Now I handled them slowly, carefully. But on my own, the day I moved out, there wasn't a big conversation. No arguments, no emotional speeches. Jason helped carry boxes to the car. Megan packed up the last few things from the guest room. Emily hugged me twice and asked if she could come over whenever. Anytime I told her, and I meant it. Before I left, I walked through the house one more time. Not to remember it, to understand it. The kitchen where everything changed. The hallway where I made that call. The room where I realized I didn't know what was happening in my own life. It all looked the same, but I didn't. Jason stood by the front door as I picked up my keys. "You don't have to go," he said. I looked at him. I know. That was the difference. The drive to Oak Brook was quiet. No radio, no phone calls. Just the sound of the road and my own thoughts, finally not interrupted by anyone else's decisions. When I unlocked the door to my new place, the first thing I noticed wasn't the space. It was the silence. Not empty, not lonely, just mine. A few days later, my first piece of mail arrived. My name, my address. No one else had opened it. I stood there for a second, holding it longer than I needed to. Then I smiled. Not the same kind of smile from that night at the dinner table. This one didn't hide anything. That evening I made dinner in my own kitchen. Simple, nothing special. But I sat down at the table and realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't being managed. And I definitely wasn't living anywhere for free. Not anymore. I stood by the kitchen window that night, holding a cup of coffee I didn't really need, just looking out at a street that didn't know anything about what I had just been through. And for the first time in a long time, that felt right. What happened between me and my son wasn't loud. It didn't make headlines. It wasn't the kind of story people talk about at dinner. But it was real. And that's what makes stories like this harder to see coming. Because family betrayal doesn't usually look like betrayal at first. It looks like help. It sounds like support. It feels like someone stepping in when you're too tired to stand on your own. Until one day you realize you're no longer standing at all. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. Losing someone you love doesn't mean you lose your voice. Grief doesn't make you incapable. And trusting your family doesn't mean giving up your place in your own life. I don't hate my son. That might be the part people expect. But this was never about revenge in the way most people think about it. It wasn't about hurting him back. It was about stopping something that should have never started. It was about drawing a line and saying clearly, calmly, without asking permission, "This is where it ends." And sometimes that's what real family revenge stories look like. Not shouting, not breaking everything, just taking back what was yours piece by piece until no one can pretend it belongs to them anymore. If you're watching this and something feels off in your own life, something small, something you've been brushing aside because it is easier not to question it, don't ignore it. Ask questions. Read what you sign. Know what belongs to you. Because the moment you stop paying attention, someone else might start making decisions for you, and they won't always tell you. This wasn't just a family drama. It was a reminder that respect isn't automatic even inside a family. It has to be maintained, protected, sometimes even reclaimed. And if you're going through something like this, or you've lived through your own version of these revenge stories, you're not alone. More people are dealing with situations like this than you think. They just don't talk about it. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think or reminded you of something you've been putting off, take a second to subscribe to the channel. There are more real stories like this coming. Stories that don't just entertain, but show what people actually go through behind closed doors. And sometimes hearing the right story at the right time is exactly what you need to see things clearly. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about money. It was about knowing exactly where I stand and making sure no one else ever decides that for me again.